So
I like how fast Lindsay brought up oil.
Yeah,
I mean, like he in the same sentence he had to bring up, and it's something we're gonna get their oil.
we're gonna render them enabled to sell oil. All right, so we have the populist right we talked about. We talked about Bernie Sanders and some of the squad. We just mentioned some of the hardcore neoconservatives. Now we have two politicians that have kind of showed their true side. In 2020, Professor Finkelstein, I supported Tulsi Gabbard because I thought foreign policy-wise, she was the best politician out there. In other words, I knew she wasn't perfect. She kept quiet a lot about her thoughts on Israel-Palestine. But when it came to, when she went to Syria and met with Assad and talked about possibly pulling out there, we were pushing her, the campaign, to recognize a little bit more what's going on in Latin America. But then she had this comment the other day, and she just said this here as well. I'm going to show you. Andrew, the United States must stand with Israel in the face of this terror attack by Islamist terrorist group Hamas. This is the latest example of the greater war being waged by both Sunni and Shia Islamist jihadists throughout the world. This should be a wake-up call to leaders everywhere that Islamist jihadists are the greatest short- and long-term threat to the safety, security, and the freedom of the American people and people throughout the world. I strongly disagree. I think the greatest threat is America. Is American foreign policy that drops bombs on a regular basis. Now, here's the other one. This is RFK. And this is really, really hard because I thought I was kind of analyzing the situation and saying there was still a tactical gain if we took RFK despite his position on Israel and Palestine. I don't know if you know this, Professor Finkelstein. It was me who went up to New Hampshire and asked him right after he had taken down some tweets from Roger Waters about his stance on Israel and Palestine. And what was so surprising to me is after he had pretty much stated that he was going to stand by Israel unequivocally, I had to say, and the Palestinians, so he would answer the rest of the question. It was upsetting, but I had looked at it as maybe, I don't know, a third rail where I can say there's so many other things we can gain from RFK that we have to take this loss. But this right here, this was so just disheartening. This ignominious, unprovoked, he said unprovoked, and barbaric attack on Israel must be met with world commendation and unequivocal support for the Jewish state's right to self-defense. We must provide Israel with whatever it needs to defend itself. Now, as president, and this is the part that really makes me upset, I'll make sure that our policy is unambiguous so that the enemies of Israel will think long and hard before attempting aggression of any kind. I applaud the strong statements of support from the Biden White House for Israel in our hour of need. However, the scale of these attacks means it is likely that Israel will need to wage a sustained military campaign to protect its citizens. Statements of support are fine, but we must now follow through with unwavering, resolute, and practical action. America must stand by or ally throughout this operation and beyond as it exercises its sovereign right to self-defense. The reason why this statement here is so disheartening and why I don't think I can ever support him is because, number one, it's pretty much giving the green light for carpet bombing, genocide, and starving these people out. Secondly, he's talking about unwavering support once he becomes president, that no matter what Israel does. So if this spins out of control and Lindsey Graham gets his way and we attack Iran, Russia gets involved to protect Iran, is RFK, if he was president, is he going to stand by Israel and provoke World War III? This was very, very hard to deal with. And the fact is that this statement here, no matter what, there's no solution here whatsoever. There's no suggestion of a solution. This here did it for me and a lot of other people too the other day. I was not even concerned or wanted to hear his announcement today that he was going independent because of this. And these two particular candidates, Professor Finkelstein, are looked upon as the most, the best foreign policy candidates that were ever out there. Tulsi in 2020 and RFK now. Your thoughts on these statements that have just come forth?
Well, I'd like to look at this question of the right to self-defense, Israel's right to self-defense. So, I would like to ask the question, do concentration camp guards, does a state which contains a concentration camp, if the inmates attempt to break out, would it constitute some sort of violation, moral or legal, of law, such that the state has the right of self-defense against those confined in a concentration camp? Now, you might say, and you're perfectly legitimate in saying, but civilians were killed. And apparently, we still don't know the facts. We have to wait for the Human Rights Report investigations, apparently in large numbers. And I have to say, it doesn't please me, obviously. And I'm not happy about that fact. And I'm not going to give a but or a however. I'm simply going to state the facts. In our country's history, we've come to celebrate people like John Brown. In fact, during the Civil War, one of the songs that the Union troops sang in the Civil War was John Brown's body is a moldering in the grave. The God above in heaven is looking kindly down. John Brown's body is a moldering in the grave. John Brown, let's be clear. I don't know how much of the history you know. I've studied it somewhat, not as much as I would like. And if God allows me maybe 10 more years, I will read more on it. John Brown, I say this in respect. He was a complete fanatic. He was a religious fanatic. He was, brace yourself, he was a jihadi.
Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, Frederick Douglass asked him not to do that because it was going to set things back.
He believed that God had sent him as a messenger to end slavery. He did. He was God's messenger. He had that fanatic's gleam in his eyes. When he went to fight in bloody Kansas, he took hostages in the course of the fighting. He killed them. He killed them. John Brown is celebrated. John Brown's body is a moldering in the grave. Glory, hallelujah. There were many a slave rebellion, even in the United States, where a lot of civilians were killed. Now, I'm not saying I'm happy about it. I'm not saying I approve of it, but I will say, at the risk of incurring a lot of wrath, just as I won't approve it, I won't disapprove of it. End the blockade of Gaza, and then we'll see how things proceed. But until you end that blockade of that concentration camp, it would be an utter and total betrayal of my own family's martyrdom to deny the right of those inmates, those infant inmates of that concentration camp, to liberate themselves and to free themselves from that tyrannical that's been imposed on them.
I have some of the things that you were mentioning before, because I think this is very important to talk about, because you've said several times, these aren't my words, these are the words of Netanyahu's government on what they plan on doing. Netanyahu's announcement on the attack. Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in operation, or in rounds, but at war. This morning, Hamas launched a murderous surprise attack against the state of Israel and its citizens. We have been in this since the early morning hours. I've convened the heads of the security establishment and ordered, first of all, to clear out the communities. They have been infiltrated by terrorists. This is currently being carried out. At the same time, I have ordered an extensive mobilization and that we return fire of a magnitude that the enemy has not known. The enemy will pay an unprecedented price. In the meantime, I call on all the citizens of Israel to strictly adhere to the directives of the IDF. We are at war, and we will win it.
I want to clarify a point there. There were 2 points. That one that you just heard, and secondly, Netanyahu made a statement that the Palestinians should leave from the areas.
I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Let me get to the first one, the one that you just played.
Gotcha.
I don't want to sound too technical about this because often legal technicalities just confuse more than the enlightened. However, here I think the point is important. He said Hamas attacked the state of Israel. That is incorrect. Gaza is part of Israel. Israel has de facto annexed the West Bank, annexed Gaza. Under international law, very simple, every one of your viewers will understand it. Under international law, what distinguishes an occupation from an illegal annexation, it's very simple. An occupation is temporary. An annexation or an illegal annexation is permanent. Those territories were occupied, meaning the West Bank and Gaza, a half century ago. A half century. It's permanent. That being the case, Gaza could not have attacked the state of Israel. Gaza is part of the state of Israel. What we witnessed a couple of days ago was a slave revolt. The slaves rose up in revolt against their masters. That's what happened. So don't let these technicalities about our state is under attack. No. Gaza, the West Bank, by international law, and I know the law. I teach the law, I've studied the law. Under international law, Gaza and the West Bank are part of Israel. What we witnessed was a slave revolt. I'm not saying I approve of it, but I won't say I disapprove of it. Then the course of slave revolts, historically, many innocents are killed.
That was awesome. And before you get to your second point, which I was going to bring up because I have it written down here, if Netanyahu is stating that he's going to hit the Gaza Strip hard, and he says people should leave, but they can't go anywhere, isn't he talking about genocide? And this is the defense.
Like
where are you going to go? You can't. You're not even allowed to go. You're not even allowed to exit that way. But this is the defense minister saying we're fighting human animals, referring to Palestinians, and vowed to attack accordingly. I'm going to play this, and then please, Professor Finkelstein, give us your thoughts on that whole statement of him saying, you know, pretty much it reminds me of when George Bush was like saying in Iraq, we're going to hit you, so get out of there. Like, where are you going to go? But this is even worse because they're not allowed to technically leave.
Not technically, period. They're not allowed to leave. That's the problem.
Period. Yes.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Let's play this and we'll get your further get your opinion on it. We are putting a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no water, no gas. It is all closed. We are fighting animals and acting accordingly.
That's
the defense minister.
Sieges?
Well, we have Professor Finkelstein. We can ask him, Professor Finkelstein.
Is Yemen we just got done helping with?
I want to just emphasize, for the sake of your listeners, I said at the beginning, if you understood certain basic facts, everything becomes blindingly clear. When he's saying animals, we're fighting animals. Half of those animals are children. Half of the animals are children. That's who they are instituting these sanctions against. They are attempting to subdue through starvation, through lack of water. They're trying to subdue a population that's 1 million children. And I really do wonder, I'm serious now, if that fact, that simple basic fact, if every day our media pointed out, hey, do you realize 1 million of the people in Gaza are children, half the population? I really wonder whether the American people would go along with these statements that are being made.
They wouldn't. I don't think people know it's a concentration camp like that. I really didn't realize the population was that high until you said it.
How dense it was?
Because, what is Israel the size of New Jersey? So my town I grew up in on the shore is probably about that size.
Yeah.
It had 30,000 people in it. 5 million people and no one can leave?
Yeah.
Like that's like literally concentrating people in a camp.
Yeah.
My late mother occasionally spoke out on the question of the Palestinians. And one of the things she said, I quoted in the very first book I wrote on the Israel-Palestine conflict back in 1996. She was once asked about the Israel-Palestine conflict, obviously because she's Jewish, she survived the Nazi Holocaust, and because I had been speaking and writing on the subject. And she said, quote, "What crime did the people of Palestine commit except to be born in Palestine?" Now, I would say, whatever you want to say about Hamas, I may not agree with you, but for argument's sake, I will concede. What crime did the million children in Gaza commit, except to be born in the concentration camp? What crime did the million children in Gaza? Million happens to be a sacred number for Jews. Because of the 6 million Jews who were exterminated during World War II, 1 million were children. So,
yeah,
that million number, and it's 1 million children in Gaza. It's 1 million children. And now they're openly boasting about wiping them out. I don't think the American people, during the war in Vietnam, the Secretary General of the UN was a fellow named U Thant. He was from Burma, very decent guy. And during the war in Vietnam, he once said, the first casualty of war is truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went on to say, I do not believe if the American people were aware of the true facts of this war, they would support it. Now, it is true. He said that, I think, in 1965. It took a long time before the truth about the war seeped out. But once it did, there really was a lot of genuine opposition to that war. And I do believe that where the basic, I don't mean reading even my books, which can be very dense, just the basic facts, were they known, I don't think people would go along with it. And that's why I leapt at the opportunity to appear in your program. I don't want to toot my own horn, but on the other hand, I've never seen any point in false modesty if acknowledging your competence can be of a service. I very much doubt there's anybody in the West who has more scholarly knowledge on the Israel-Palestine conflict, or Gaza in particular, than myself.
Mm-hmm.
I devoted a large part of my adult life. And yours is the first program in a very long time that I've been allowed on to reach a reasonably sized audience.
Yeah.
And it's impossible, especially now, amidst this hysteria. And I'm not saying, incidentally, I'm not saying that a lot of the visceral, the instinctive revulsion, I'm not even saying it's invalid. I can understand it. But even that instinctive, visceral revulsion has to be placed in the context of what has happened to Gaza, not since 1948, because as I said, it all begins when approximately 300,000 refugees from Israel land in Gaza. But not even to go all the way back there, but just in your lifetime and in my lifetime. I'm talking about since 2006. It's 18 years ago. That's not so long. Just that history. If they only knew the past 18 years, I think I can accept the revulsion and the outrage, but I still believe people are capable of both feeling that revulsion and outrage and still saying, you know, I kind of get it. I kind of get it.
It's people don't know it's a prison.
Yeah,
they don't know it's a prison.
They don't.
If you think of it as a clear, like in a prison riot,
yeah,
that's what you describe. And when you hear a prison riot, like, oh, it's revolting.
Slaves don't attack; they revolt. Right? That's exactly.
But nobody thinks of it as a prison like that, well, and that's the key to it because it makes a lot of sense when you think of it that way.
We have a controlled media apparatus that is controlled by the Israeli lobbyists. They have a lot to say when it comes to things. So we're in a race right now to get the truth out there before it gets any worse, because like you said, Professor Finkelstein, the number one casualty of war is the truth. Well, I don't want it to get to war, right? We're trying to stop and educate people what's really going on there, so there will be some pushback. And I've noticed some pushback online. There has been a little, comforting things to see. All right, some people are starting to get this and they're going to push back. Please continue, Professor Finkelstein.
Well, either he's a pathological liar or he's completely demented if Netanyahu really believes they could go somewhere.
They know people don't know. Like, I think people kind of think, I swear to God, that, they just have to do like checkpoints. They can probably leave. I don't think people understand.
They can't.
Like, and I've known pieces of it for a long time, but I never thought of it. I mean, I remember when the blockade happened, the list of stuff people couldn't have, like musical instruments. It seemed like a bit much at the time, but time flies. Much like Guantanamo that's still open. Yeah, just kind of forgot about it.
At one point, hard to believe, but facts, as the British adage goes, are stubborn things. At one point, the Israeli officials actually calibrated. I hope you listeners will listen. They calibrated the number of calories that should be allocated.
I remember that.
Each Gazan to keep them just above starvation. To keep them just.
Wow. Yeah.
That's almost German precise.
Unfortunately, I didn't say, I should say, fortunately, I didn't say that, but fortunately, you did say that.
Yeah. No, it calls to mind some historical things.
It calls to mind people who do experiments on children, but I won't go further because your program might be canceled forever.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave it at that.
This might be Japanese level even.
Let's show just really quickly, because this is what's going on. Gaza is now blackout. Gaza, as bombs are being dropped. Israel right now. They just hit a high-rise building, one of the tallest buildings in Gaza. Take a look at this. Now, there was a worry, Professor Finkelstein, that once this pushback took place, this action on Saturday morning, that Israel was just going to wipe it clean. What are they? The term is called mowing the lawn, right? I believe is the term when they just go in there and bomb the hell out of the place. But this has come back. Hamas threatens to execute civilian hostages and air each execution via television. Dan Cohen had just mentioned the Palestinian resistance just announced that if Israeli bombardment of civilian homes without warning continues, it will begin to execute captives one by one and publish the videos for all to see. Hamas has more than 100 Israelis held captive. Israeli society simply won't be able to handle the psychological pressure of watching these executions. If Israel wants to save its citizens' lives, it must negotiate. No amount of bombing can change this. And he put down...
Won't they?
Checkmate is what he put down.
I don't think that's a checkmate. You think they won't let them people die and go ahead and?
Well, I don't know, but we do see a lot of chaos now at the airport with a lot of Israelis trying to leave the country. I don't know if they have the stomach to deal with this. They've never been under this type of pressure before. I think the Israeli citizens. That's why when people had talked about the festival that they raided, I mean, it was on the other side of the Gaza fence. How can you be so naive as to think that you're going to be safe there, that attack could never happen upon you? You're right on the other side of the fence. You're not in Tel Aviv.
On Ukraine.
I know. But Professor Finkelstein, what are your thoughts about this as far as...
I'm going to. Thank you. Yeah. If you go back to like 2007, and you look at the Israeli government statements about what they were going to do to Gaza just before Operation Cast Lead, I can assure you, because I quote them at length in my book on Gaza, I can assure you they made the identical statements as they made today. Now, you might ask, well, then why didn't they do back then what they did today? And the answer is very, very simple. It's because international public opinion reined them in. There were some restraints, not a lot. But Gaza lived to see another day. Why do I say this? Because all of those people, from Matt Getz to Marjorie Taylor
Greene. Yeah.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm thinking of Mary Tyler Moore.
Sorry.
She's spinning around in the city of...
My age away. From Matt Getz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, all the way to AOC and Bernie Sanders, and in the middle, Chuck Schumer and Tulsi
Gabbard.
Tulsi Gabbard and Nikki Haley. They bear the burden. They could rein in Israel. Israel can be stopped if international public opinion bore down on Israel. Israel is not an island. It lives in the world. And the pressure on it can become unbearable. The statements that you read this evening, all of them, every one is prosecutable in the International Criminal Court. Everyone could haul these monsters before the court. So the institutions are there to stop them. And it's the green light that's been given them by our Congress and our elected officials. They bear the responsibility, not primary, but certainly not tertiary, at least secondary responsibility for the annihilation of the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
Every one of them. should be held accountable for every child that's starved to death, for every infant who dies because of a lack of water. Today, according to a friend of mine who's generally very reliable, they bombed the incubator center in Al-Shifa Hospital. I actually have a little connection to Gaza. After one of the annihilatory attacks, I raised $100,000 for one of the hospitals, and they put up a plaque at my request to the memory of my parents in that hospital in Gaza. And my guess is, knowing Israel as I do, that hospital is no longer there. And that is, we have to say, I won't say primary responsibility, but certainly secondary responsibility, culpability, is that of all those people who you cited, because Israel can be reined in. All the United States has to say is, Mr. Netanyahu, Mr. Defense Minister, if the case goes before the International Criminal Court, sorry, we're not going to support you. We're not going to block the prosecution. And I dare say, having studied international law and having studied prosecutions in that court, it's actually an awful court, but that's beside the point, there is quite sufficient evidence to bring back a guilty verdict.
Can I ask a question? Does Israel belong? You know how we don't belong to that court? Because, otherwise we could get prosecuted for what we did in Iraq. So back around then we withdrew for the Hague Invasion Act. Bush signed that if we ever brought on trial, anyone will invade the Hague. Is Israel a part of it? Or do they take, it seems like they do whatever we do. Like, hey, we can do whatever crimes we want. It seems like it's the same as us.
There is technically a state of Palestine, and the state of Palestine does belong to the International Criminal Court, and the state of Palestine has twice brought cases before the criminal court on the basis of Israel conduct in the occupied territories, and also when it attacked the humanitarian flotilla in 2010.
Yeah.
May 31st, 2010.
Yeah.
So technically, yes, it can be prosecuted. And if the United States says, we're not going to protect you, I think Israel will think twice.
Yeah.
It's the impunity granted this government and country by the United States in particular, but also the EU, that enables it to carry on like Mongol hordes, because that's exactly what they are. It's Genghis Khan, it's Mongol hordes. But they couldn't do that without the impunity granted them by all the people you quoted this evening.
Professor Finkelstein, the last thing I want to talk about before we get you out of here is the geopolitical ramifications in which this situation could spin out of control into, because I don't think a lot of people understand what this means. I presented this scenario where, Israel obviously is trying to, what I see, goad America into a war against Iran. And we heard what Lindsey Graham said. We understand there's a relationship between Iran and Russia, and how badly that situation could just spin out of control, where you have two major powers attacking each other. This is the comment by the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova on the sharp escalation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Russia is gravely concerned over a sharp escalation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. In this we would like to reaffirm our principled and consistent stance that this conflict, which has continued for 75 years, cannot be resolved by force and can be settled exclusively by political and diplomatic means, by engaging in a full-fledged negotiation process based on the well-known international legal framework stipulating the establishment of an independent Palestinian state within the 1967 borders with a capital in East Jerusalem that coexists with Israel in peace and security. We regard that the current large-scale escalation as another extremely dangerous manifestation of a vicious circle of violence resulting from chronic failure to comply with the corresponding resolutions of the UN and its Security Council, and the blocking by the West of the work of the Middle East Quartet of international mediators made up of Russia, the United States, the EU, and the UN. We call on the Palestinian and Israeli sides to implement an immediate ceasefire, renounce violence, exercise restraint, and begin, with the assistance of the international community, a negotiation process aimed at establishing a comprehensive, lasting, and long-awaited peace in the Middle East. Now, one thing I really noticed from this whole situation is I think that they're kind of quoting international law when they talk about the 1967 borders, but they're also, in my mind, implicating the fact that this siege and this blockade of Gaza is illegal. And, you know, it's obvious the position they have taken over here. What are your thoughts on Russia's statement when it comes to Palestine?
Be perfectly frank with you. That is an excellent statement. You know what? It's surprisingly excellent because it says everything that needs to be said.
Yeah.
Namely, number one, there has been for 50 years, I told you at the beginning, I can't go through the whole history. There has been for 50 years a framework for resolving the conflict. And all parties, except for the United States, now it's a little wavering, the European countries, and I will grant, because I don't want, I said, I am confident the truth is on the side of justice. So I'm not afraid of the truth. That Hamas, Hezbollah rejected that framework. Now, first let me state the framework and then I'll tell you what Hamas and Hezbollah have had to say. The framework is very simple, exactly what she said. That was an elegant, precise, accurate statement. She said the framework is 2 states on the June 1967 border. She is accurate that the entire, the entire world community embraced that formula with the exception of the United States, and it's not a state. Hamas, up until 2006, when it got elected, yes, it opposed that framework. There seemed to be reasonable possibilities in 2006 that its position would evolve. When Hezbollah was asked about that framework, the leader of Hezbollah, Syed Nasrallah, he said, "We don't support it. However, if that's what the Palestinians want, we won't stand in the way." The state of Iran has repeatedly voted in the UN to resolve the conflict on those terms being, and you were very perceptive in your comment. I compliment you on your mental acuity. They framed their response in the terms of international law. That's what the law says. The chief lawbreakers, indeed, the only lawbreakers are the United States and the state of Israel, who refuse the terms for now a half century to resolve the conflict diplomatically and allow all parties to live in peace. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
I have to say that was a remarkably succinct, lucid, and what's most important, accurate account of how we got here on this day.
Yeah.
The U.S. and Israel refuse or thumb their nose at international law because Israel will not accept that Palestinians have the same right to self-determination, the same right to breathe. Because to quote that Israeli official, they're all human animals.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
The Israeli Ubermenschen, the supermen who have such contempt for the Palestinians and for Arabs in general. And I would say, at the end, if you'll allow me a small digression, and then we'll end it. My mother and father were in the Warsaw Ghetto. They were there until the uprising. And periodically there was the 40th anniversary of the uprising, the 30th anniversary, and my mother would be interviewed because she was one of the survivors. And she tended to downplay the significance of the uprising. She said it's so exaggerated. We only had a few guns. We were up against the German army. If the Soviet Red Army couldn't defeat the Germans, do you think a few starving Jews in the ghetto could? So she said it's so exaggerated. And once a person interviewed her, a friend of mine at the time, and said, but is there anything redemptive from that event? And my mother thought hard, and she said, you know what? The human ingenuity that those fighters displayed, because remember, the ghetto was filled with catacombs, tunnels. They were called bunkers. And the bunkers were dug by hand. They had only the most primitive implements. And my mother said it was a real credit to human ingenuity what these young people did. And now I will say something else, which might get the wrath of God, speaking as an atheist, the wrath of God on me. You cannot help but admire and respect the ingenuity of the people of Gaza. Remember, Gaza is smaller than a postage stamp. You know, it is the most surveilled place on God's earth. All of the super technology that Israel brought to bear, or has brought to bear, to probe every nook and cranny in Gaza. And it's such a small space. And yet, they managed to plot a very complex operation under these very strange circumstances.
Like prisoners. Prisoners got nothing to do but make a plan all day.
I know, but there's one difference. It's prisoners who are being surveilled 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the most sophisticated surveillance technology known to date to humankind. It's a credit, I believe. It's a credit to human integrity, and it's also a credit to the thirst, the unquenchable thirst for freedom. So at this point, acknowledging all the horrors that occurred, I respect that achievement of the people of Gaza. Now, I know people are going to go berserk and bonkers over what I said, but I will remind them John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. We celebrate the man who, in his fanaticism, committed significant atrocities because he was so committed to the ending of slavery, which he considered an inextinguishable sin. And I think we should also honor, even though a lot of quote unquote, I won't drop the quote unquote, a lot of innocent blood was spilled, we should honor the right of the people of Gaza, the slaves of Israel, who have risen in revolt and who realistically will quite likely perish. I, for one, honor that memory the same way as I sing John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. The God above in heaven looks kindly down. And I believe, as a resolute atheist notwithstanding, the God above in heaven looks kindly down on the last desperate effort of the people of Gaza to free themselves from that concentration camp.
Professor Finkelstein, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. I don't know if you know this, but I grew up in Boca Raton, South Florida. I moved to New York when I was a young kid. My graduating class was about 85% Jewish, and I had a lot of mentors that were pro-Zionist. And when it came to this subject, I hid for quite a while. I didn't want to talk about it. I thought it was too controversial. But after what happened on Saturday, I thought it would be a good point, a good time to stop hiding, because I think it's desperate times, and I don't want to see a genocide take place because a lot of us were silent. And I thank you for coming on and having this conversation with us here on the Jimmy Dore Show. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
We'll see you soon. Professor Finkelstein, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Dallas, Houston, San Diego, Bloomington, Illinois, Indianapolis, and Levittown, New York. Wow, that's a lot of dates. See you there.